so that we can start today's session. Anyone feeling touched? I can see a smile that looks touched.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I want to give you thanks for this day. Thank you, Lord, for enabling us to be here and for the chance to learn and interact with each other. We want to commit the meeting into your hands, the session ahead, and those who will be facilitating. Pray to bless them and bless our time together. We give you thanks for everything and pray that you go ahead of us. We pray all this in the holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Imelda.
Good. May I request us to be upstanding for 1 minute and stretch, freestyle stretching. Take care of your neighbor to your left and to the right. Just stretch the way you want. Good. While you are still studying, we already have our facilitators for this morning. Actually, they are here very early at 8. We are just waiting for quorum. I think people slept a bit, and we want to appreciate them for timekeeping. So that is the PS, Diaspora Affairs. I'm told you've heard this for several minutes, so I will not take any extra time. As most of you know, we have the State of Nation address by the head of state in Parliament, and before that she has to meet a committee of Parliament, so she would want to make a presentation and then proceed. So I don't want to take any further time. May you be seated. I hope now you are refreshed. So, Madam PS, karibu.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I've done this, and I immediately remember last night, I was telling my kids I'm going to be here this morning, and my 11-year-old said, I know there's going to be that thing that preachers talk from. You're going to stand on the side and do this. And then she did it exactly. And I've never realized I do it, but now that I think about it, for as long as I have taught, I always do that. So I will, if you catch me doing it, let's not make it a thing. Roseline Njogu is my name. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for continuing to invite me. I believe this is my third, this is the third time I've come to speak with you. And I was saying a little bit earlier that this is usually for me a critical marker in terms of where we are in the year. I know once we do this conference, sasa tunaingia kipindi ya lala salama, and then Merry Christmas, and we go. So I'm excited to be here. And I'm grateful for the continued collaboration. The last time I was here, we spoke about reverse. I'm really trying not to do it. Okay. We spoke about reverse mentorship. I don't know how many of you were here last year. It's a whole new crowd, mostly? Okay. We spoke about reverse mentorship, and we agreed, and I said that I was going to help set up some reverse mentorship at the State Department for Diaspora Affairs. We've had some successes, but we've not had as much success as we'd have hoped to have had. It's something that we're still experimenting with, trying to see how younger officers can reverse mentor, can mentor older officers. It's a very strange thing within hierarchical structures such as ours for people to learn this way as opposed to this way. But we keep doing these things. So you asked me, or I understand that the theme this year is She Leads, Women's Contribution to a Sustainable Tomorrow. And you've asked me to speak specifically about navigating and shaping the political landscape. Let me set some context probably. We live in a very, or let me put it this way. The state is a very masculine creature. There are various scholars who have written and talk about the masculinity of the state. The idea that there is a man in the law. There's a very interesting article that I like and I quote a lot from when I write, called The Man in the Law. This particular article argues that when the law speaks, when the law is written, it has a man in its mind. It says that any man who commits a crime of blah, 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 blah shall be liable to a term of imprisonment of 3 months or a fine of so much, blah, blah, blah. Yes? The law, until very recently, and older legislations will use masculine language. And we will even see, and many of you do this, you will see that even in contracts, we will usually have this very annoying little clause that says, reference to the masculine gender shall also include a feminine gender. I hate that stuff. I remove it from all my contracts. And then I go through and just make sure that we use, gender, what is it called? Neutral language. Or you will hear, and you will find this, this committee shall comprise of so-and-so and the Principal Secretary for Diaspora Affairs or his representative, right? Even when it is clearly obvious, at least I hope, that the Principal Secretary for Diaspora Affairs is a her, as she. But it's not just in the language the law uses that tells us the law thinks of the subject of the law as a man. Yes, it is also the other things that the law does. We have in tax law provisions that allow you to file your personal income tax and your wife's, isn't it? Yeah? Which is very fascinating, as you can imagine, because even when I go to file my returns, I'm often asked, do you want to declare your wife's income? And so on. But we don't have the reverse, right? Again, the law, and it comes from, it comes from legacies of seeing men as the standard subject of the law in the public space, and women as supporting caste, and women as persons who play within the private sphere. I can talk about this a long time. I'm writing a PhD on it, so I will not belabor the point. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that the state does have a certain subject in mind, and that person is usually a man. Over the years, we have done a number of things to change the state's mind, yes? We've made law reform. We have a constitution that talks about, that uses language that, for example, says women and men shall have equal rights and so on. And on purpose, foregrounds the place of women in the law, in public discourses, and so on. We've had affirmative action now for many, many years, and some of us have benefited from affirmative action. That has been, when I grew up, I've stopped making assumptions about people's ages these days. When I grew up, the girl child, sorry, can I can hear whispering, I'm not sure, it's very distracting. When I grew up, supporting the girl child was one of the most important things, one of the most important campaigns that we ever heard of. I don't know if that was your experience as well, right? Yes? No? Supporting the girl child education, girl child things, alongside with the AIDS kills. There used to be a very scary thing where there was a hand that was crushing the word written AIDS, and population control and things like that. What I'm trying to say is that over the last 20, 30 years, we've made a number of interventions in the law, in our political system, and so on, to deal with this idea of the man in the state, or to deal with this idea of the masculinity of the state. You will find now that we have, and you all know, of course, provisions, even aimed at ensuring that we have more women in elective positions. We created an entire office called the woman representative, right? The county member of parliament, who is usually a woman. I think we all call her the women rep. To make sure that we have more women in elective positions. We have rules around no more than 2/3 of any one gender are represented in appointive and elective positions and so on. And we've made a number of gains. Currently, we have the highest number of cabinet secretaries who are women ever, right? Of any cabinet over the last 60 years that we've been in, we've been a nation. This is the highest number of CSs that we've ever had. The judiciary is a very beautiful picture, right? So lawyers, probably more than anywhere else, have made the most gains, right? So you have a female chief justice and a registrar and the deputy chief justice. There are even our first ever attorney general, who is a woman. But in other places, the picture is not as rosy. Even within government, there is still a very powerful idea and aesthetic that the state is still very much masculine. You can often see this through photographs, probably, that are taken, through, if you go for any political event, you're likely to find that you have a severe underrepresentation of women. And women are still clamoring for space in government and elsewhere, and especially at the top. So you will find a lot of women and this is, I think, not just in government, but across various sectors, you'll find a lot of women sort of entering the workforce, whether they be nurses or doctors or lawyers or accountants. But as we go up, we lose a lot of the women, and the top is still very much, the top is still very much buttoned up, suits with ties. I'm just looking at the one person who's wearing a suit and a tie. But he's an ally. And for various reasons, there's the motherhood tax, right? So I go away for, and this is probably more in corporate worlds than in government. I take my maternity leave and I'm gone for 3 months, and I have complications and whatever. And everybody knows once I come back to work from my maternity leave, I might not be all there because I'm doing this really important work of actually growing an entire human being. And I might miss my promotion cycle, or I will not hit my targets, or I might not get my bonuses, and so on. And as we go up, the amount of work that women have to do in the private space crowds out, or really ends up taking a lot of their time, energy, power. It is uncompensated work. It is unpaid work. It is extremely important work for the state to continue, for the race to continue, but it is unpaid work. And then their public, so you end up having women having to choose between their private reproductive and public productive work. Or some scholars argue you actually have 3 spaces. You have a public productive, you have a private reproductive, and you have a community responsibilities. Your community responsibilities are those things that you're the one, if somebody dies in the family, your husband says, well, in your WhatsApp group, you will update me. Yeah? You're the one who's thinking about, okay, so-and-so has lost, and it's his relatives. So-and-so has died, we need to make mandazi, we need to we need to carry this stuff and take it with us. You're the one who's thinking about, when we were last in Shags, I noticed that so-and-so's, I don't think so-and-so's caregiver is treating them well, we need to find them another care. So that sort of work. Part of it is a private reproductive that you do in your home. It's childbearing, it's pregnancies, it's raising children, and the mental work that comes with that, with organizing a home. But then there's also these community responsibilities of going to chamas, and if you're in religious settings and finding yourselves having responsibilities like that. So, and these two are extremely heavy. And they end up meaning that perhaps the third one, the public reproductive, takes a bit of a hit. Men behave a little bit differently, or they are likely to be very productive in the public productive, because in the private reproductive, somebody else is sort of taking the lead and is dealing with that and is keeping it tidy for them. When we get to about 70 years old, we find out that the community work and the private reproductive was actually a fantastic investment. Because then women, at that point, women outlive men by 10 years. Statistics say the minimum. My husband and I are almost age mates. I keep telling him. But truthfully, statistics say that women will outlive men for about 10 years. And it's not just my thesis. I think it's what a lot of people have said. It's partly because women spend a big part of their years building these community ties and these ties that we find in private reproductive. So whenever we are tempted to not do it or to think that this thing really, really costs me, I think women have always known that this is the long game, right? So when we are older, we're more likely to receive that M-Pesa from the children as opposed to the dads who don't even hear the phone ring. I'm completely kidding, and it is bad manners, and we all should do better. Okay. So all that to say that apart from, sort of those things that keep women from going to the top and so on, in political spaces and in national leadership, politics is also still very much physical. There's a physicality to the job. I will give you examples from my own life. If I go to an event where there are my bosses and so on, and let us say it is somewhere in Kitui, there is going to be possibly physical running, there is going to be a lot of fast movement, and there is going to be shoving, so much shoving with very big men, right? So, and do they know who you are? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. Do they care to move for you, or everybody's angling to make sure they stand right next to the boss so they can have a photo? Yeah, which then they can say, I was with HE the other day and so on. So there is a physicality to the job, and I have found myself very often as I am attempting to do my job and walk, I am elbowed, I am pushed, and so on. And that's just probably a picture of what it looks like even besides the physicality of it. When I first took this job, somebody I love dearly told me, you're gonna have to do this. Okay? You're gonna have to do this. Government is for sharp elbows, is what I was told. So you need to stick out your elbows and shove everybody. So because these places, these national spaces of leadership and politics are for this, then people with sharper these do better, yeah? Just because of the physicality of it. But even in spaces where having sharp these shouldn't matter, such as social media spaces, being in national leadership is still particularly brutal for people, and especially brutal for women. When we attack male leaders on social media, we will attack them for various reasons. Sometimes I'm laughing because what are you going to do, right? You will laugh or you cry. So it's very rough. But very often when we attack women, we will take on their bodies. And we will body shame somebody for 2 hours. I think completely forgetting or having told ourselves that these people are just, leaders have no feelings. They are not human, yeah? So for women, it's particularly rough. And what I have seen then is that many female leaders who even have the most fantastic ideas might keep from communicating them, especially on social media. Why? Why should I put myself out there and then you tell me, ata meno yako inakaaje? These are real comments from my tweets. Yeah, so, things like that. Or worse comments about your body. And people then will stay away from these spaces because of the physicality of it, or the techno-physicality of it, or the digi-physicality of it, and the violence in these spaces. Then you will find that we have carried what we have in the natural space, in the public spaces, into the digital space, and that makes it particularly bad. So people tend to stay off, and we say, wacha wamenyane na wanaume wengine. Okay, so I've set the context. So in that context of a masculine state, but we've made all these interventions to try and deal with that and ensure that women can have spaces, but we have a society that is still fractured and still very much has ideas about who should lead and so on. I also come from a county where the governor has been impeached several, I don't know what number of, anyway. She has been impeached several times, largely for various reasons, but one of those reasons is because she's a woman, and they have decided atapumzika mbinguni, and others in that county have said, Ngavana ni mama. So in the meantime, all this to say that in this context, which is untidy and which is difficult and which is very masculine, but you have all these interventions that we've made to try and make it a fairer space for women to play in. We have organizations that are come on board that even just work with women who want to be elected to figure out, how do I run a campaign? How do I fund this campaign? How do I deal with this space and organize it and make it work? It's still a difficult space to be. So in that context, that untidy context, we still know that the leadership of women and leadership by women is essential, critical, and fundamental for a sustainable tomorrow. We know that women lead well. We know that women lead, in particular, communities and societies well. So how do we ensure that the very untidy context does not steal from us that promise of women's leadership? Or let me put it this way. How can those of us who are in that untidy space already govern differently? How can we lead for a sustainable tomorrow? How do we navigate and shape the political landscape against the various problems that I feel I have spent a lot of time outlining? And you can think about various things, right? So broadly, you can think about, and I think we've spoken about this in previous meetings, we've spoken about building structures that outlive you, right? We've talked about that. We've talked about identifying potential leaders and making them come alongside you. We've talked about accountability and using technology to track delivery so that we are able to be accountable for monies that we use for government, and so on. We've talked about working with partners, public participation, and so on. I want to propose that we lead or we navigate and shape the political landscape by leaving out what I call, or what I am calling, the 5 tenets of feminist governance. I know feminism is a trigger word for many people, so if that one is too triggering for you, we can talk about the 5 tenets of gender sensitive, gender responsive governance, whatever. I'm the one with the microphone, so I'm going to call it feminist governance. We'll deal with it badai. So the 5 tenets of feminist governance. The first, I would say, is gender responsive programming. We talk a lot about gender responsive budgeting. Yes, I think we're all familiar with this concept, where we create budgets having in mind the idea that the expenditure, public expenditure of funds affects men and women's lives differently. What do I mean? If the government has, let's say, 5 hypothetical situations, please. I realize I'm a government official and the government has said it has money for this. Let us say, in the hypothetical kingdom of Wakanda, that government has $1 billion, what do they use? Shillings to spend. And they can choose to build roads with $1 billion shillings, or they can choose to put lighting and water. They are all infrastructure projects, yes? Roads, very important, people can move, blah, blah, blah. Or lighting and water, also important, water comes to your home and there is lighting at night. Those two projects, lighting and water on the one hand versus roads on the other hand, have very different outcomes for men and women. Gender responsive budgeting says that if you use government money or funds to do things around welfare, but also around things like water and lighting, you're going to have a bigger impact on women's lives than if you build buildings and build roads. If you build roads, that's great. We will drive on them. We will have access to markets, probably. Yeah? If you do lighting, women will probably be able to walk on that street later in the night, which means if I run a salon somewhere, I will not be telling my client that 6 p.m. is my cutoff time, right? But if I can work until 9 p.m., then I'll be able to take that last manicure client, that last hair client, and so on, and go home. Literally having lighting on the roads means that women's incomes grow. It is documented, okay? If you spend money on safe public transport, women's lives improve because they will not be harassed. Incidences of sexual violence in public transport go down, and it also means if I run the salon, as I mentioned, I can get home later. I can leave home earlier. I can increase the number of hours that I earn. Yeah? If you get water to rural homes, it means that women who spend a lot of time going to fetch water in the river now suddenly have all this free time with which they can enter the paid economy. Yeah? So suddenly I have time to do some other things, and probably even if I don't have much of an education, I can take in the children of other people and charge a little bit of money for babysitting, and then I've freed up another woman to go do another job. So 2 incomes created, yeah? As opposed to the rest. So these are some of the tenets of gender responsive budgeting. But now I'm talking about gender responsive programming. A big part of the role of PS, such as myself, is to create the programs for the State Department and decide these are the things that are the priority for us, and these are the things that we are going to fund in this year. So if I decide, for example, that I am going to fund an expensive buses and vehicles, which we might need, that might be useful. But if instead I decide I'm going to fund clinic and consular services to Saudi Arabia, for example, that might be a better decision. Why? Because in Saudi Arabia, I have primarily women working there who are often domestic workers and without much income and social capital. So if I run these clinics where I can do medical, I can do counseling, I can do passports, IDs, and that kind of thing, the impact is much higher there. So gender responsive planning and programming means that we have that at the back of our mind and think about how do I lead to make sure that the people that I'm trying to serve are actually getting value for money. You can think about various other things. You can think about spending money. I know some county governments, I can't immediately remember which ones, and I think it is the State Department for TVET, that had actually put aside money for childcare to ensure that young women who want to go to a TVET and get a diploma or a certificate in something, but who are young mothers, therefore have nobody to leave their, young and poor mothers have no one to leave their children with, can actually bring their child to school, put them in the daycare that is at the TVET, be able to attend my classes in plumbing or whatever, come in, attend to my child, and be able to go home in the evening. And that immediately transforms people's lives. You could have spent the same money running conferences and trainings. Yeah? Also important work, right? Conferences and trainings are really important, but this programming was a little more gender responsive. So that's one of the ways you can do this. You can do gender responsive programming. Secondly, and I hinted at this, is mentorship. Bring other women along. Begin to see a 20-year succession plan, a chain, where you say, in 20 years, if this ministry is still standing, and it should be, who would I want to be sitting here, 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 and here? And how can I begin to call out that leadership in them so that when the time comes, they are ready for that promotion, they're ready for that training, they're ready for that posting, to go and work at the mission abroad. How do I do that? So, and this calls for reflection, strategic thinking, but also stepping outside of the day-to-day sort of work. You have to step back and say, if this State Department is to be running well in the next 20 years, how do I make sure that I have grown the people? But then step up a little more outside of the State Department and say, if this state is to be running well in the next 20 years, who do we need? Who are the future, so in my case, who are the future diplomats that this country needs? What do they need to know? What do they need to understand? What values do they need to have in their heart to be able to negotiate the best for Kenya? What skills do they need to learn? And then begin to see that early and start training for that. And say, this one, akona kujituma. Is that what we call it? Yes. Huyu akona kujituma. I have been asked to nominate 3 people to go for this training. I've already nominated 3. Let me ask that organization to actually give me 2 more slots. And they're likely to give me 2 more slots. And then I send these people because you're trying to grow an army of future diplomats, an army of future accountants, an army of future agricultural extension officers or whatever, right? So bring them along and build this pipeline so that if you're ever asked, who do you recommend for this, you already have people at the top of your mind. Work with friends, that's the third point. In other words, leverage partnerships that can take you places. If you're leading from a position such as I do, you want to think about the work that academics do. We come at the same problem from very different angles. I've mentioned my domestic worker in the Middle East issue. But let's think about a different problem, such as evacuations in the case of war. We're currently mounting an evacuation out of Lebanon, as you might know, which has had conflict. And we have already evacuated over 300 Kenyans in a very, very complicated situation. When you do evacuations in ongoing conflict, you have to balance several things, including the fact that the number of flights that fly into that city have reduced, right? Once the war hits, most airlines cancel that route. So you have to find and compete for the few tickets that are available with various other countries and so on. In Lebanon, for example, we don't have an embassy in Lebanon. We serve Lebanon from Kuwait, but we have an honorary consul, which has limitations. So how do you do that? Now, partnerships is to bring people who can help you succeed to the table and say, look, IOM, I have this particular concern. How can you help me? What can you help? What assets do you have on the ground? How can you help me with this? But academics, okay, all of you work in security studies and so on. This is something that we can expect to continue to happen in this particular region for the next several years. What should we be thinking about? How should a country such as ours position itself? We are a country that has a large diaspora, 4 million Kenyans now, and growing every day because of a lot of labor migration. So what are some of those things that we need to do, to think about? And so you bring around the table friends. And I say friends because they are partners who care about some of the same things. And they will extend you their networks, they will extend you their goodwill where you do not have goodwill, and they'll be able to help you succeed. Fourthly, I have just the 5 points. Fourthly, or the tenets of feminist governance, borrow masculinity when it is needed. Borrow masculinity when it is needed. There are places where you still need to have this, and sharp ones, and there is no going around it. So how do you borrow masculinity? You find allies who then have sharper, elbows. Who have sharper elbows than you, who can shove for you. Okay, fine, allow me to just do it. In certain spaces, they are called promoters. Before we used to call them sponsors, but now nobody dares use that word. But these are people who will use their privilege to help you, right? They have access to certain places. It might be because it's a boys' club, and there is no day you will make it into a boys' club, but they have access to the boys' club, and they can push your agenda for you. It might be literally that somebody needs to be shoving other rougher people for you, and then he will shove and say, hey, ondokeni PS. Okay, then you can, without having to do the shoving yourself or whatever. But borrow masculinity when needed, particularly from these allies that I'm talking about. And the physicality piece is a very crude example of it, but there are spaces where you will need to find somebody to speak for you or to push for you. I find that African women are very good at this. I find that African wives, this is what I'm writing on in my PhD, I find that African wives are very good at borrowing masculinity when they need it. Here's what I mean. Here in the boardroom, we have fought, we have done everything and so on and so forth, and I go home and I need something done, but people in my home are not behaving well, and we need to get something done. And then you go and speak to the elders. Yeah, you go and speak to the elders, very demure, very humbly, and you say, our fathers, we need this done, blah, 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 kwa mila na desturi zetu, mzee anastahili afanye hili na lile, na amekataa, naomba muongee na, that is borrowing. That is borrowing masculinity. That is one of the contexts where African women are very good at borrowing masculinity when they need it. There's no shame in it. There's no shame in it. Borrow masculinity when you need it. The fifth and final point is this. As often as you can, lead like a girl. As often as you can, lead like a girl. You know that phrase where we use it derogatively, she throws like a girl, yeah? When we say someone is not playing baseball or whatever well, we say she kicks the ball like watch your mama. I think it's a Kenyan version of she throws like a girl, isn't it? Let me say, as often as you can, lead na, mama, embrace it. And this is what I mean. As often as you can, lead like a girl, lead like a woman. This is what I mean. The idea we have of leadership being men only who do things is not an African idea. It's not an African idea. It is a colonial idea, I dare say. For many years, our communities were led by men and women. We have stories of the Mekatililis and the Wango Amakeris and all of these other strong leaders, yeah? In every one of your communities, I know there are stories of women leadership. It is different often from the leadership of men, but it is powerful, yeah? No? Okay, so let me give you examples from scripture. Proverbs 31 is one of those verses one of those chapters that I think women have only two kinds of relationship with that chapter. They love it or they hate it. It is the chapter of liberation or the chapter of subjugation. Yeah? People think of it as, can you stop putting things on me? I am not going to wake up early in the morning and my lamp does not go out at night and so on. And newer translations of the Bible talk about a noble wife, isn't it? They call it the character, is it? Something. A wife of character, a noble character, blah, blah, blah. The original in the Hebrew, the language is Eshet Hayil. Hayil is, I've said that like a Muluya, it is Chayil. But I don't think they say Chayil, I think they say Hayil. Eshet Hayil. It means, the only way I could translate it after it was explained to me, and I did a lot of research on this, is ninja warrior. Okay? A woman who is a ninja warrior. So she's not a demure. Sorry, I really did not intend to talk about being very, very demure and very whatever. She's not a wallflower. She's not necessarily a flower-wearing pretty girl who, does these very lovely domestic things. Lovely domestic things are important, and they should be done, I think, if that's your kind of tea, if that's your cup of tea. But the description of this is a person who is powerful. She's a businesswoman. What does she do? She brings in wares from afar, right? She waits for merchant ships to bring stuff. I think people will need to go and read this chapter with new eyes. But the description here is not one of a demure, diminutive woman who's quiet and doesn't quite speak and speaks only when spoken to and in this sort of very soft voice. It's a ninja warrior. I recommend you Google it and do image. You Google Eshet Hayil and then you do image. Not now, image. And the picture that you will see is one of a woman dressed for battle. Because that is who Proverbs 31 was supposed to be. It's a woman who's dressed for battle for various reasons, for her family, for her children, and so on. And that is the leadership of women. Women lead strongly and powerfully. Women also lead from the heart. And that is why you will be told, Wacha umama, here we are trying to talk politics. Why are you talking to us about mushy things? Lead with inclusion. Bring people to the table. I was not in public service or in politics at all before I took this position in December of 2022. It's been 23 months. So I am not used to people telling me, random strangers, citizens of this country telling me, you're our mother. Sasa, these are very strange. These are very strange things to me. These are things being told to me by 50 and 60-year-old men and women. You're the mother of diaspora. You're our mother. It's very confusing. They are old enough to be my parents. But that is the image of what? That is the image of what? Of leadership, of heart leadership. Every mother knows instinctively how to lead. She might lead 2-year-olds, or she might lead 30-year-olds, but every mother's leadership or mother's leadership generally comes from the heart, is inclusive. There are people who will usually tell you, and you'll see this often on social media, I'm a very, very chill woman until you come after my kids, and then I am what? Yeah, then all bets are off. I think we all know these moms, or we are these moms. But that is it. As often as you can, lead na umama. Lead as a mother. Lead as a girl. Lead from the heart. Because when someone has injured your children and you're going at them because of your heart. And because this person is your responsibility, isn't it? So in national leadership and in political landscape, perhaps much more than in private sector, we find that the nation does need, and I shudder to say this, but mothers like that. So leadership, mother leadership. Does anybody, is that a phrase? Did I just make that up? Should I immediately own that? Mother leadership, you first had it here. Okay, mother leadership is, I think, what this nation needs. People who will go to battle for this country, people who will, there are very many memes that go around. One of them was, if this country, if such certain places are led by women, by now, if we were very broke, she would have found money somewhere and come and told us, Ipesania. That is it, Ipesania Chama. So lead like that. Make the money go much farther. Get the budgets and really stretch them. Grow your people, nurture your people. And your people being your officers, but also the people who you care for, in my case, diaspora, in agriculture's case, farmers, in education's case, children and teachers, and so on. So as I conclude, colleagues, I've given you the 5 tenets of feminist governance: gender-responsive programming, mentorship. The third one was? Partnership. The fourth one? Borrow masculinity. And the fifth one, as often as you can? Lead like a girl. Or lead now? Mother leadership. Mother leadership. Mother leadership. So as I conclude, colleagues, as I always do, I encourage more and more of us to take up positions of leadership, especially in public service. I invite as many of you as would be interested to dare. It is a difficult space, and I started by painting a very dark picture, isn't it? But that is exactly why it must not be surrendered. That is exactly why we must do it. I encourage as many of you as possible to join public service and to encourage others to do so. Secondly, I want to invite you to the Diaspora Day, which is on the 4th of December, where we'll be celebrating our diaspora. Karibuni sana. It will be at the KICC. And finally, allow me to wish you fruitful deliberations as you continue with your conference. And because this is the end of the year, to say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and may the Lord keep and watch over you. Thank you very much.